Hey everybody, this is Paige from Mosaic Moments, and in this video I am actually going to be showing my favorite technique for this scrapbook system. Seriously, this is my favorite thing to do every time I go on a trip. I make sure I take photos so I can make panoramas when I get home. So that's what I'm going to be showing today, is how to make a panorama. So I'm actually going to be doing a handmade one. I find it easier to do it with the mat and knife and ruler. We do have a video that I will link to the top right here. So if you want to see it done with the strip die, you can do that as well if hand cutting is just not an option for you. But I think you'll find it's actually easier than you think. Also, a lot of people look at our panoramas and say, I don't have a photo big enough for that. And you certainly can go out and print a large photo, but I'm going to tell you that you don't need it. You actually just need 2 or 3 4x6 photographs. Alright, so let's get started with the tutorial. So I have 2 4x6 photographs here. So when you're out traveling or at a scenic place, you need to take multiple photographs across the scene and not just one. So here there's 2 photographs. They're both landscape orientation. You can also have photographs that are portrait orientation. You want to make sure they're one or the other, not both, because that might be harder for you later. So the first thing you're going to do is overlap one of the photos, because usually when you take these photographs, they tend to have some overlap. Sometimes you get lucky and there isn't any, but most of the time there is. So you're going to trim off the overlapped part on just one of the photographs, as I'm doing here. So only trim one photograph and don't trim the other one at all. That's my tip. So then you're going to line the horizon lines up as I did here. So the horizon line looks straight, but then you could probably see that the photographs, they weren't themselves lined up completely straight. So we need to trim them to the same width. Just now I glued this photograph and I'm going to place it on my mat. I decided to place it on the 1/2 inch mark. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So the trick is, and this is the same if you're doing mosaic, is to glue on every inch. I have the piece of cardstock there because if you notice, sometimes you get glue on the mat and then it gets on your photograph. And I don't want any on my photo. So anyway, so you can see the horizon line is correct. So a handy tool, you do not need this. This is an optional tool, but I recommend it, is the Quick Glance Guide, and this helps me know which lines to cut along on the mat. So I figured that out. The length of these photographs are going to be 3 squares long. So the lighting looks a little bit different right now, but that's because I was tired of the reflection showing in the Quick Glance Guide. So anyway, what you're going to do now is you're going to trim down the height on both of these photographs. So I'm using the Quick Glance Guide to check where I'm going to cut my photograph. So I figured out the first line to cut the bottom part. Right here I have my metal ruler with the cork back. The cork is good for not slipping. And I'm going to grab my craft knife. This one is from Fiskars. Basically, you want to hold your knife like a pencil and then cut it straight back. And then take those excess pieces off. And you're going to use your Quick Glance Guide again. I put the bottom line on the bottom of the photograph. And now I'm going to see where the top line goes on the mat. Definitely, I highly recommend double checking your cutting before you cut. Make sure that it's exactly where you want to cut, and that it'll cut across both photographs. You don't want to cut and then one of them ends up being too short or something. Then you have to start all over. I'm using my knife again to cut both photographs. Gonna take these excess pieces off, and as you can see now both photographs are the same height and it looks beautiful. Now they are, It actually kind of looks like one big photograph now. I was showing the quick glance guide just now just to show you that now both photographs are the same height. So the next step is to cut both photographs into 1-inch strips. I just changed the lighting again so it looks brighter now. So this is actually the easiest and to me the funnest part of making the panorama. So you're going to cut along every inch as I'm doing here. And I personally, my tip is to start with the photograph that was not trimmed. So I'm first cutting on the photograph that's a full 6 inches long. And that's because, as you'll see coming up, you know, there's the part that is already trimmed in between each photograph. And I think if you started with the one on the other side, you may like mess up somehow and it won't be an inch. And anyway, I just find it easier to cut with the one that did not get trimmed down. Now I'm cutting along the photograph on the left. This one is less than 6 inches. And I'm going to cut this last part to make it a 1 inch. And as you can see, I have some excess and I'm going to pull it away. So as you can see, if I started on that side, by the time I would get into that center one, it might have messed up. Anyway, so I used my Lil Chizler to pick up that piece. And I can now place on my grid paper. And as you can see, the glue's already on the back. I used removable adhesive so you can easily move it from the mat and just place it on the grid paper. There's no need to reapply any more glue. It'll become permanent over time. And now I just need to fill in the rest of the space. And it's already starting to look really good. So my page is completely finished. I just love making landscapes in the panoramas. I just think it leaves a much bigger impression than if I just got this whole scene in one photograph, like a 1 4x6 size. So yeah, it's really not that hard to make a panorama. I definitely recommend trying it out at home. I would first start with something like a landscape before doing something like architecture. That might be a little more difficult to line up the details. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I just showed you the basic tutorial. I'm actually going to do a second layout that's actually a little more advanced. So if you want to, stay tuned to watch that one. This time my strips are going to be 1x5, and to do that you're definitely going to need a landscape that's portrait orientation rather than the landscape. So I'm going to do like I did in the first one where I overlap my photographs. Now, I recommend if you're using 3 photographs like I'm doing here, don't trim down the middle photograph. Just trim off the ones on the sides. So here I'm going to trim the overlap part on the photo on the right. And don't worry, sometimes the photos don't line up like perfectly accurately. I recommend just doing the best you can so, you know, it's the least awkward looking. For instance, in the case on the right, my mountain didn't line up perfectly, but it looked funny when the lake didn't line up, so I chose to line up the lake. And keep in mind, they're all going to have 1/8 inch gutters between them. So, you know, if it's not perfect, no one will notice. So now I'm trimming off the overlap part on the left photograph. Once again, my center photo in the middle, I didn't trim it at all. I trimmed the ones on the outside. Personally, I just find it easier when you go to cut it into 1-inch strips. I'm just trimming it again. I felt like I just needed to trim it a little bit more. Sometimes that happens, and now I'm just trying to get everything as straight as possible. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you go and you're like, oh, this doesn't look exactly right, it's okay. It'll turn out fine in the end. So now I'm using my quick glance guide, and now I'm using it the 1x5 length. So I'm going to trim the bottom first. I use my quick glance guide and I put my ruler down. I'm going to trim it with my knife. So now they're all the same length on the bottom, and now I just need to get the top. Use my quick glance guides again to know which line to cut across. And there we go. Now all 3 photographs are the same height. Wow, does not look amazing? All right, for this one, I'm trimming off at the first inch line. So I have them lined up on the thickest inch lines along the mat. So I trimmed off the excess on this photograph. And now I'm going to go along and cut on every inch. I could skip that one because it's already cut basically. I'm cutting my center one, got to skip the next one, and I'm doing the same thing again on the left photograph. I'm going across. This is my last cut. I'm going to take off the excess. You want to make sure also when you cut these you have 10 strips. Otherwise it won't fill up your whole page. So make sure you have enough photographs to make 10 strips worth. Now I'm using my Lil Chizler to pick up my first piece. Now I get to put it on the grid paper, which is the easiest part of making any panorama besides cutting the 1-inch strips. This part's really easy. I'm so glad there's the grid paper so you can line up each one and they all look straight. And it makes a great looking panorama in the end. Oh, and I'm already done. And this page looks fantastic. I wish you all could see it in person. I actually think it looks better in person than on the video. But I still hope you can see the beautiful scenery. And I really think it leaves a much bigger and better impression of how this place was to me. It was such a beautiful hike. And doing this panorama, especially this is the large way. And again, if you want to make the large strips like this one, you need to make sure your panorama is in portrait orientation rather than landscape. But you can see it leaves a I don't know, I'm just really amazed. And so I hope you enjoy making panoramas at home. Be sure to like this video and then you can come back, and whenever you make your first panorama you can refer back to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun creating these at home. Thanks for watching, and see more on mosaicmoments.com.